Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Chronurgy Wizard, which came to us from the Explorer's Guide to Wildemount. The Chronurgy Wizard is widely considered to be probably the most powerful wizard subclass in the game, and not always in a good way. Their level 10 abilities specifically can be very, very heavily abused and can possibly wreck the game if players are trying to find ways to abuse it and the dungeon master just allows them to do so, which is something I don't recommend. However, we're not here to, pass judgment on how you want to play the game. We're here to talk about the subclass. So, if your DM was foolish enough to allow you to play this subclass, then by all means, at least push your luck. Maybe don't try to break the game, but at least, have some fun with it. Anyways, like all wizards at level 2, you get your subclass. And in this case, we're taking Chronurgy, which is going to give us two abilities. The first is Chronal Shift, which is very, very similar to Portent in a lot of ways, but there are some differences. Anyways, you can magically exert control over the flow of time around a creature. As a reaction, after you or a creature you can see within 30 feet of you makes an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, you can force the creature to re-roll. You can use it after you've seen the results. The creature has to use the new roll, and it's twice per long rest, which is the same as Portent as well. So, some of the differences. Obviously, with Portent, you have to use it before they roll. This is slightly better because you can, wait to see. However, it is using your reaction, which is thus slightly worse overall. With Portent, usually you've had a fairly good idea of what your target number is, right? So you can probably guess whether or not, even like a more middle of the road result, like a 7 or an 8 or something, you can usually guess if that, with your bonuses, are going to be enough to hit, miss, succeed on a saving throw, fail the monster's DC, whatever, right? And of course, if you have extreme results like 1s and 20s or 3s and 18s, 19s, whatever, then it's probably a guarantee. So one thing about Chronal Shift that is nice, though, is that with Portent, you have to use that dice instead of making the roll. And if you weren't paying attention or you weren't thinking about it because you had 100 other things that you're trying to think about as well, then you might just forget, oh crap, I was going to use that on whatever, right? Whereas with this, let's say they roll a nat 20 on the monster's giant attack, and you're like, oh, that sucks. Wait, I got that ability. I can make him re-roll. That is nice. But the fact that it's using a reaction, overall, I feel like it's slightly worse than Portent, but not by a lot. And Portent is one of the best level 2 abilities that wizard subclasses have, period. So being slightly below that still isn't a bad thing. However, you also have another ability at level 2, and this one is a lot better than Divination Savant, just to put it mildly. So you also get Temporal Awareness, which just allows you to add your intelligence bonus to your initiative. So, most likely a +3 to a +5 for the majority of your career, just added to your initiative. War Wizards get something similar, so it's not like this is completely unprecedented. There's other classes and subclasses, like the Gloomstalker, of course, famously gets to add their wisdom. The Swashbuckler gets to add their charisma to their initiative. There are other subclasses that do something similar, but, you're a wizard. You've got awesome control spells, you've got awesome damage spells, and a lot of times being able to hit the enemies with that fireball before they all charge your party members, or before the barbarian and the fighter both go charging in, because good luck convincing them to just hold their action. No. That guy rolled a 26 for his initiative because he's got good dexterity and rolled high and had alert, so he wants to go fast. He's not holding his actions back. Come on, he's just charging in there, and you want to be actually faster than him if you can, because fireballing him with all the baddies is not so good. Hypnotic patterning him, not so good. Hitting him with a confusion spell, not so good. Although the barbarian probably is confused a little anyways, but still, let's not make it worse. Anyway, point is, adding your initiative to you, or your intelligence to your initiative, is great. This isn't even a secondary stat. This is your main bread and butter stat, and you're just adding it to your initiative. Very nice. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with you taking alert as well. So, you know, speed kills, as they say. Anyways, level 6, momentary stasis. As an action, you can magically force a creature within 60 feet of you to make a Constitution saving throw or be encased in a field of magical energy until the end of your next turn or until they take damage. It's incapacitated, it has a speed of 0, and you can use this intelligence modifier times per long rest, right? So, overall, this is a control ability. It does target Constitution saving throws, which is pretty unfortunate. But there are a couple decent things about it. In general, it's probably going to be worse than a, you know, 3rd level spell that you're going to cast at this point, right? But it doesn't require concentration, which means that let's say, well, let's use the Hypnotic Pattern example that we just used a minute ago, right? You cast Hypnotic Pattern, you lock down some of the enemies, but some of them make their saving throws or whatever, right? But now you're concentrating on Hypnotic Pattern, and you're like, okay, well, what am I going to do this round? I mean, I could ping away with a cantrip for poor damage. It's like, or I guess I could just use my momentary stasis ability and try to lock down a different target. You know, one of the ones that made a saving throw, for example, right? You know, so using it as a way to supplement your control spells and, you know, not having to use concentration is pretty decent still. Overall, it is a all or nothing single target targeting a bad save, but you know, it could be worse. Level 10, it gets worse. Arcane Abeyance. When casting a spell using a slot of 4th level or lower, you can encase the spell's magic into a moat. Okay, sorry. The spell is I lost my place for a second there. The spell is frozen in time and held within a gray bead for 1 hour. The bead is a tiny object with 15 armor class and 1 hit point, and it's immune to poison and psychic damage. I know, that was a huge concern for you probably, that it was going to be taking poison damage, but no worries, it's immune to poison. When the bead is destroyed or the 1 hour duration ends, the bead disappears in a flash of light and the spell is lost. A creature holding the bead can use its action to release the spell, whereupon the bead disappears and the spell uses your spell attack bonus and saving throw DC, but the spell is treated in all other regards as the person who held the bead cast it. So in other words, it's going to use your spell attack roll, it's going to use your spell save DC, but it's going to use their concentration. So you could give this to the fighter and have like a haste spell ready to go, for example, right? And now he's going to be concentrating on haste instead of you, which is pretty nice because now you can concentrate on something else. Possibly hasting the paladin. So now the fighter and the paladin can both be hasted. You could, you know, just getting around concentration in general is a pretty powerful ability. There's also some weird things you can do with this, with spells that just last forever. Like, for example, let's just go back to that paladin and fighter example, right? This is usable once per short or long rest, by the way. So let's say you use this ability, you give the fighter Find Familiar. You take a short rest, the fighter, of course, summons his familiar because the beat only lasts an hour. You then give the paladin a familiar, and then he summons his familiar, of course. These familiars are just as if you'd cast Find Familiar. They just last forever. You could literally make sure everybody in the party has a familiar. That's pretty cool. Just having spells like, say, like Slow or Hypnotic Pattern or Fireball or whatever else you wanted loaded up and ready to go is pretty awesome. Another thing to remember is that it only has, like, it only takes one action for that person to release the spell. So, you know, one combination I've seen people talk about and abuse is things like Lehman's Tiny Hut, which has a much longer casting time than that, and therefore it can't really be used in combat. But you could have that queued up inside the bead, and then somebody in the party could cast Lehman's Tiny Hut, and you could all hide in the hut and just shoot out and kill whatever you're fighting. It's incredibly lame, and I definitely wouldn't recommend doing it, but it's there, you know. Spells with, you know, longer casting times, like, well, let's say, like, Summon Greater Demon, for example, has a casting time of... Oh no, that one's only... I was thinking of Infernal Calling has a 1 minute. Summon Greater Demon is only 1 action, so never mind. But some of the summoning spells have, you know, longer casting times. A minute, 10 minutes, whatever, right? The fact that you can just store that in a bead and now it has a casting time of 1 action, meaning that anybody could use it in combat, is pretty powerful. In a lot of ways, this is similar to a Ring of Spell Storing, so it's not like it's completely unprecedented and there's nothing else comparable, but it is a pretty powerful ability. Like I said, you could easily make sure that, you know, several members of your party all have powerful spells that they want to be able to use, and now, as an action, they can all summon those spells, and each of those spells could have required concentration, but now all those party members are concentrating on the spell, not you, leaving you free to concentrate on whatever spell you wanted to concentrate on. So it is pretty abusable. It's pretty powerful. Although I do think that if you know, talk to your DM and just, you know, say like, hey, I'm going to try to confine myself to using things like haste or slow or other, like, good spells, but spells that, you know, aren't going to necessarily, like, break the game, like the Lehman's Tiny Hut trick, for example, right? And I think that that's, you know, not so bad. It's still incredibly powerful, but I would definitely, if I was a Dungeon Master, I would have some concerns about my players trying to, you know, just abuse this non-stop. So I would at least want to talk to them and have some kind of understanding in place, like, maybe you limit them to spells that only take an action to cast, you know, that could be okay. Because this is using an action, it does mean that you couldn't just load everybody up with Counterspell, so I guess there's at least that, since Counterspell takes a reaction to cast. So, you know, I guess there are some things like that. But even just giving, you know, everybody Dispel Magic, for example, could be pretty powerful. Anyways, moving on to our final feature, the level 14 ability. Convergent Future. When you or a creature you can see within 60 feet of you makes an attack, ability check, or saving throw, you can use your reaction to ignore the dice roll and decide whether the number rolled is the minimum needed to succeed or one less than the minimum to succeed, your choice. When you use this feature, you gain 1 level of exhaustion. Only when you finish a long rest can you remove a level of exhaustion gained in this way. So, again, if we compare this to Portent, which it is pretty comparable to, again, right? It's very similar to Portent. It's also similar to our Chronal Shift level 2 ability that we already got. There's definitely a lot of overlap there. But this one is just, you know, they either make it or they fail. Your choice, right? And it is 60-foot range, not 30 as well, compared to the level 2 ability, so there's that. It's, again, using our reaction. Overall, it's really, really powerful. It's even better than Portent in that regard. But the downside is way worse, because the downside is that you get a level of exhaustion, which really kind of limits you to using this, like, you know, once a day or just in emergencies. Even using this early in a day sucks, because now you're going around for the whole day with a level of exhaustion. Now, granted, in the 1 D&D playtest exhaustion rules, that's not quite so bad. The new exhaustion rules are a lot more, A, easy to comprehend, and B, reasonable to play around, I think. But overall, it's still not a terrible ability. I would definitely use Chronal Shift whenever possible and save this for, like, do or die type situations. But just the ability to force somebody to succeed or fail on a saving throw or attack roll or whatever else is pretty good. And again, this is one where, you know, they can make that dice roll and then you use this ability as your reaction. You now ignore the dice roll and you decide if it was a success or failure. It is pretty strong. My only complaint about it would probably be not even the exhaustion. I don't have a problem with that so much, but it does feel very redundant compared to our level 2 ability, which was already doing something kind of similar. But, you know, overall, it's even better. At least for the strength of the ability is even better. Like I said, the downside actually, in my opinion, makes it actually worse than our level 2 ability. But, you know, like I said, it's there for an emergency. Overall, though, this is a very, very powerful subclass. You can, you know, force rerolls on key dice rolls, right? You can boost your initiative. Well, not even you can. You just permanently do. Once you hit level 2, you just get your main stat modifier permanently added to your initiative, you know? Which is, by the way, I compared it to like Gloomstalkers and Swashbucklers earlier. But this is actually, you know, kind of better in some ways. Granted, those guys are probably focusing Dex as their main stat. So Wisdom or Charisma as a second stat, you know, you're going to probably lend them that like +6 to start with, or +5, and then let's say if they have max Dex and then, you know, a 14 to 16, they're going to be looking at a +7 or +8, right? The Wizard's probably going to be in the same boat because Dex is going to be our secondary stat, maybe in our tertiary stat, but probably second. Especially if you're, you know, playing this guy, you might as well at least have a +2 for your Dex bonus, if not a +3. And then you've got your intelligence. So, you know, that's pretty good. Like I said, the level 6 ability isn't terrible, that's for sure. It's still a pretty decent ability. You know, it's a concentration-free crowd control effect. It does have a lot of downsides, but, you know, there is some upside there too as well, like we've already said. The level 10 ability is ridiculous, and the level 14 ability is very powerful, but has significant downside. So overall, though, you've got a subclass where every ability is at least pretty decent, and some of them are mind-blowingly great, especially Arcane Abeyance, which, like I said, really allows you to start abusing a lot of the concentration mechanic, which is kind of there for, you know, for a reason, right? But just being able to get around that in a lot of ways is very, very powerful in and of itself. That's not even including, you know, potentially going into some weird territory with spells that, you know, probably were never meant to be used in combat. But anyways, that's the Chronurgy Wizard. Overall, I mean, what's there to say? Like I said, it's probably the best wizard subclass there is. It is setting specific, though, so, you know, but, you know, a lot of campaigns, we don't really care about that stuff. We just let people use whatever. We all know it's true. Anyways, that's going to bring me to the end of that. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, leave me your comments in the comment section. I read every single comment. I'm very happy to say that even though my interview with Treant Monk, it did have some issues, apparently what happened is I had a second. So the night before, I test drove everything to make sure it was all working perfectly, and it was. And that was the problem, because I still had that instance of Discord running apparently in the background. So then when I taught the Treant Monk, it was in a different instance of Discord, and that other one was using my microphone and my webcam. So I basically had like a second mic that was 3 feet away from me and was not particularly good, so the sound quality wasn't as good as it should have been. And of course I had no webcam, so there were definitely some issues there. It was my first time trying to do a, you know, Discord live interview, so, you know, hopefully I'll get better at that stuff. But, you know, it was still good, and I'm glad to see that it did get a lot of feedback. It got a lot of views as well, so I'm happy to see that generally people seem to actually really like that conversation. And, you know, even though it had some issues, it still ended up being a good conversation overall. And hopefully I will continue to just get better and have less technical issues in the future. Yes, good old boomer streams. What do you do? Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.